Annie, written by Val Wood, read by Anne Dover. The moral right of the author has been asserted. Prologue. Did other rivers, streams and creeks fall into these mighty waters, cascading down hills and surging through valleys to swell the rushing waters of the mighty Humber? Annie wrapped her shawls around her. A wind was rising, cold and sharp, coming in from the sea. It disturbed the water's dull surface, agitating it into frothy white crests, and she saw by the increasing undercurrent that the tide was on the turn. The river was on a journey, and she was compelled to follow it. Part 1. Chapter 1. They're coming, they're coming, they're coming. Gibbet, gibbet, gibbet. They'll swing, they'll swing, they'll swing. At each detaining suck and slurp of the mud around her boots, Annie thought she could hear the menacing warning echoing in her ears. She glanced over her shoulder. The fog was eddying around the middle of the river, hiding the banks of Lincolnshire on the other side. But as the grey dawn broke, the vaporous mantle started to lift, rising to reveal the muddy brown waters lying just below the footpath where she was so desperately running, away from the town of Hull and the consequences of her wrongdoing.
"Oh, who'll help me?" she wailed,
and then in fright put her hand over her mouth and looked again over her shoulder to see if the constables were following her, and listened for a hue and cry. A painful stitch in her side slowed her down, and as she gasped short, dry, rasping breaths to relieve it, she became aware of a melancholy moaning. She stopped and listened, but the sound also stopped. She hurried on, and it started again, a whimpering lament of distress. She closed her open mouth. It was there again, inside her head, filling her mouth, her ears, her throat, shaking her body with its intensity so that she could no longer stand. Her trembling legs gave way beneath her and deposited her onto the muddy path.
"Oh, dear God! What have I done?"
On her knees she rocked and cried.
"I'll get found out. They'll come for me."
Wide-eyed with terror, she hunched into herself and listened again. This time, the only sound was the familiar lap of the river, the heavy-winged flight of cormorants as they swooped low over the water, and the thud of her own laboured breathing.
"They won't have found him yet."
She took deep, shuddering breaths.
"Course they won't. Tide'll have covered him. They might never find him."
Francis Morton's face swam in front of her, and she screwed up her eyes to stop the tears and obliterate the vision.
"I'm that tired,"
she mumbled.
"Dare I stop?"
She hadn't slept all night. She had gathered together her meagre possessions, her last few coins, her boots and shawls and morsel of bread, and left the dark, damp room which she and her children had called home. She'd kept to the narrow alleys until she reached the edge of the town, then, with a brief backward glance, had slipped out of the broken, decayed walls and headed for the river. In that dark hour before morning, she'd hesitated on the Humber bank and surveyed the deep waters as she had done every day of her life, from her childhood on the wharfs to her wifehood in the mean house in the rat-infested alley on its banks, and contemplated that all she knew was that beyond the spit of Spurn the river emptied itself into the yawning mouth of the German Ocean. But upriver, of that she knew nothing. Having no patient mother or wise father who might have explained the river's direction, she had only hearsay that the river split into two, dividing itself and going separate ways. And what then? Did other rivers, streams and creeks fall into these mighty waters, cascading down hills and rushing through valleys to swell the rushing waters of the Humber? She'd wrapped her shawls around her. A wind was rising, cold and sharp, coming in from the sea. It disturbed the water's dull surface, agitating it into frothy white crests.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?